there's 4 basic steps for thyroid function. You got to have your raw materials, and I'll talk about what raw materials are most important. You've got to have a healthy HPA axis. So HPA stands for hypothalamus pituitary adrenals. This is the glandular system, and the hypothalamus and pituitary are in the base of the brain, and they are like the master glands for the body that help protect the body and help it respond to stressors. So if there's been a chronic stress that's created a burden on this system, there's going to be problems. So a healthy HPA axis is very important. Then you've also got to have good conversion. You've got to have good conversion in the liver and the gut. So healthy liver, healthy gut, and then you've got to have healthy receptor sites in the cells and the ability of the cells to have everything they need to use the thyroid hormone. So those are the 4 steps that are really important. Okay, so this is what we're going to do next. I'm going to talk you through this and tell you what that is. Okay. So the first thing when we're talking about how thyroid hormone is made is we're actually going to talk about the hypothalamus. So I'm going to write HT, just short for hypothalamus, put a little circle around it like it's a gland represented in the base of the brain. And the hypothalamus is involved in the thyroid because it makes a hormone that it sends to the pituitary called thyroid releasing hormone. So you don't have to know how to spell that. I'm just going to put TRH, which is the common acronym for this hormone that the hypothalamus makes to help make more, just getting in focus here, to help make more thyroid hormone. The hypothalamus needs some basic things. It needs oxygen, right? Just think about what does any healthy brain need? Oxygen and food. So it needs to have healthy glucose levels. I'm writing glucose. And then what else do you need to have a healthy brain and a healthy body? We got air, we got food, but you could argue water. But the third key thing besides water would be movement. You've got to have adequate movement. And I think this is one of the major things I'm always talking with people. I spend a lot of time talking to people about what they're eating and about their supplements. But there's a couple other things that are really critical, and sometimes people are a little more hesitant to really go for those. And that would be the appropriate exercise program for the person that's going to keep the movement and get them all those benefits they need, and a healthy light environment. Okay, so we've got these basic things. We're going to have healthy hypothalamus. Then it's sending the message via the TRH hormone to the pituitary. I'm going to draw that next. Put another circle around it. And the pituitary makes a hormone called TSH. So if you've had your thyroid checked, you've probably heard of this hormone. It's not a thyroid hormone. It's a pituitary hormone. But the brain has these ways of sensing how much thyroid hormone there is, and then it will adjust the TSH based on that. So that's why doctors like to check the TSH level. When we're talking about that, a healthy TSH level is going to be 1.8 to 3.0. And I'd like to call your attention to this because this is different than the medical range. Medical range is very large, and there's a number of research studies showing that people are underdiagnosed with thyroid issues because that medical range is so large. It might be like 0.5 to 4.5 or 5, depending on someone's age. This is the 1.8 to 3 is a more functional range for someone who is not medicated. If you are on a prescription medication for thyroid, then I would expect it to be slightly lower than the 1.8. And so knowing your numbers and knowing what's optimal can sometimes help with making some tweaks when you're working with thyroid health. So the pituitary makes the TSH, and the TSH is thyroid stimulating hormone, like I said. So I'm going to draw the thyroid now. It's a butterfly-shaped gland. The TSH is sending a message to the thyroid to make some thyroid hormone. And so it'll do that in the presence of iodine. I'm going to put an I there for iodine, which the body converts to iodide. and then using adequate sodium. There's a sodium pump that moves the iodine into the thyroid gland. And then it needs two other things. It needs something called tyrosine. Tyrosine is an amino acid that's found in chicken, turkey, nuts, and seeds. So you've got to have that raw material, tyrosine and iodine, in order to make adequate thyroid hormone. Iodine is found primarily these days in seafood, fish, seaweed, foods from the ocean. Our plant-based foods that are farmed on land used to be high in iodine, but now due to poor farming practices and just time, most of the iodine has been lost to the ocean. It's all eroded away as the soils eroded away. And so that's why eating foods from the ocean are a good way to get natural sources of iodine. And you probably need to eat them not just like once in a while, which is what standard Americans do. You probably need to be eating them almost daily to be getting the maximum benefit. The last thing you need to make thyroid hormone inside the thyroid is something called TPO. It stands for thyroid peroxidase, and it's an enzyme that helps the thyroid gland to combine the iodine and the tyrosine and some other specific proteins to make the actual thyroid hormone. So I'm going to write TPO, and that'll become important because there's something called a TPO antibody that is significant for most people in America with thyroid problems. So TPO. Okay, so then we're ready to make thyroid hormone. We actually do make like a thyroid hormone called T1 and T2, but they're not very active. We're going to skip and just talk about T4, which is the most common thyroid hormone, and T3, which is the second most common thyroid hormone. So if you have your thyroid checked and you just have TSH checked, it's not going to give you very much information because that's a pituitary hormone. So you really do want to think about, how can I measure the T4 and the T3 to really understand if my thyroid hormone levels are an issue and if there are things I need to do that could optimize them. So T4 is an okay source for hormone for prompting protein metabolism and maturation in the cells. Remember, that's one of the main reasons, one of the main goals of the thyroid hormone or uses of the thyroid hormone in the body. So T4 is kind of ho-hum, like it'll get the job done, but it's not going to be anything amazing. But T3 is like really good, a great, very powerful hormone for protein metabolism for the body. The interesting thing is that we only make about 6% of the thyroid hormone into T3 here in the thyroid. And we make 94% of all the hormones are going to be T4. And you might ask why. You just said T3 was so like amazing. Why wouldn't the body make more of that if we want to optimize our physiology? Well, we think that it is because if you got too much T3, you know now that the thyroid hormone, including T3, regulates your metabolic rate and your heart rate. And so just think, if you got too much of a good thing, you could have a heart attack. And so we think that this minimal amount of T3 that the body makes is a way to help protect us. But the cool thing about the body is it has many other ways to make T3, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Before we talk about that, I'm going to talk about how the thyroid hormone is moved through the body. It's on something called thyroid binding globulin. So you can have this measured in a blood test as well. Most people don't need it, but it can be important if you're wondering about the transport of thyroid around the body, or you're wondering about globulins and other other hormones or stress hormones. So I wrote TBG for thyroid binding globulin, and I'm going to draw it like it's just a little tractor trailer truck. So you can think about how thyroid hormone would be like transported through the highway of your body to a cell. So here's my little tractor trailer truck. I have to credit my teacher, Dr. Tom Culleton, and his teacher, Dr. Tatis Parazian, on this, because they're the ones who came up with this. And I learned all of this from them. So you got these tractor trailer trucks. They're going to take your thyroid hormone. I move it around to the body to where it wants to go. Well, where does it want to go? Well, I mean, all of your cells. So we're just going to draw a random cell like a muscle cell. You can pretend it's a cell in your bicep if you want, or you could pretend it's an eye cell. It doesn't really matter. So I'm just writing muscle up on the cell. And the thyroid hormone is going to be transported there, and then it's going to jump off into the cell, and it's going to become the free form, free, F-R-E-E, free T3 and free T4. This is important because when you order thyroid labs, or you ask someone to order thyroid labs for you, you can either order the T3 and T4, it'll be like total T3, total T4, or the free form. I always like to order the free form because then I know exactly what thyroid hormone my cells are actually getting and using. The thyroid hormone will go into the cells, into the nucleus of the cell. So I'm going to draw a double helix here for the nucleus of the cell. And it's going to help it to make whatever proteins the cell needs to mature and grow. Okay. So I'll just write proteins, growth, maturation, affects so many things the cell does. But the thing is, in order for your hormone to work, you need some things at the cellular level for it to work. So sometimes people get in a situation where they have adequate thyroid hormone, or they're taking a medication and their levels look good, but they still feel like they aren't getting thyroid hormone. They still have a lot of health complaints. So sometimes these materials and things at this cellular level become important. One thing is vitamin A. And I mean fat-soluble vitamin A palmitate, vitamin A that comes in whole dairy products or in pastured animals. I'm not talking about beta carotenoids that come in plants like carrots. That's probably not going to help somebody with this issue. You're going to need the fat-based vitamin A. The other thing that you need are methyl groups. Methyl groups are parts of healthy foods like eggs, and green vegetables are very high in methyl groups. Choline is an example of a vitamin that's a methyl group that's very important here. I'll say methyl groups, and you can just think eggs and green leafy vegetables in the diet, or testing micronutrient levels to check choline and similar things. And then the last thing you really need in the cell is healthy blood sugar control. If you are insulin resistant, or your blood sugar is swinging, you tend to have a sweet tooth, you crave and eat a lot of carbs, then chances are your insulin levels are not very healthy, and the thyroid hormone at this receptor site is not going to be optimized. So you got to have healthy insulin levels. And that's usually checked with glucose or with hemoglobin A1C, but you can get a fasting insulin level check as well. Okay. Healthy functional levels, if you had these things tested, would be 1.0 to 2.0 for the free T4, in case some of you have had these labs or want to get these labs done and geek out about the numbers. And for T3, an optimal level would be 3 to 4. So when the levels are not within these ranges, it's okay. It doesn't mean that you have a medical problem necessarily, but it does mean you need to start doing some things if you want to help overcome some of the thyroid issues you may have. Okay, next I want to talk about the other ways to make T3. I mentioned only 6% is made in the thyroid hormone. Or in the thyroid gland, sorry. So the rest of the thyroid T3 is made in the liver. So I just drew a liver. I'm labeling it liver. And I'm going to make a big circle for the gut. Okay, so the body has, if you have a healthy liver and you have a healthy gut, you have another other ways to make T3. So there are actually 3 pathways in the liver that relate to T3 production. So the liver will take the T4 hormone that was made, there's so much of it made by the thyroid gland, and it's going to use an enzyme called 5' deiodinase. And you don't have to know how to write that or remember that, but you should remember that there's an enzyme here that's really important for making T3. Because remember those 3 stressors I talked about? those will block the 5' deiodinase enzyme. And so then someone's T3 level will be low and they will have low thyroid signs. This pathway also depends on some key minerals. It depends on iron. So if you're low in iron or you're anemic, what do you think is going to happen to thyroid hormone production? Not going to be good. Very important to eat enough iron. If you're a vegetarian, somebody really has to be on top of addressing low iron issues if they're present. Most people will get the best iron from red meat. It's so much better. You'd have to eat a trough of plant-based iron every day to get anywhere close to the near amount of iron. So if you're not eating red meat, then there may be more, you may be more predisposed to developing an iron issue, but that could be tested and addressed. So I'm not necessarily saying it is, but it's something that I see so commonly that I encourage people to have something called ferritin checked, Ferritin. All right, so I'm going to write iron. We need iron for this pathway. We need something called selenium. Selenium is a mineral, does a lot of fantastic things in the body, and it helps this pathway go as well. Selenium is very high in animal foods too. So pork, poultry, and Brazil nuts, you may have heard that. The other thing that's really important for this pathway, which is where a lot of the thyroid hormone conversion happens, is healthy serotonin and healthy dopamine levels. So if someone's kind of struggling mentally and emotionally, they don't have good gut health, they're not making a good amount of serotonin in their gut, which is where most of it's made, then this thyroid pathway is not going to work. The other pathway is T4 to reverse T3. So this is like a safety mechanism where the body can tie up extra T4 into an unusable form of T3. So the purpose for this pathway would be if a woman was pregnant, potentially making more thyroid hormone, or the fetus also making more thyroid hormone, the body would have a way to tie up that extra thyroid hormone so that she doesn't get to a dangerous level. The other thing that applies here with this pathway is people that are under a high amount of stress and their cortisol level is dysregulated, like I was speaking about earlier, they will oftentimes upregulate this pathway, and that's one way that cortisol levels can be interfering with the thyroid hormone that's available. Finally, there's one last thyroid conversion pathway, T4 to T3 acetate, like acetic acid, the stuff that's high in like apple cider vinegar, acetate, and T3 sulfate, like sulfur. Like, think about sulfate. Think about onions and garlic, cruciferous vegetables as being sources of sulfur. So the body will use the acetate and the sulfates and send this to the gut, where the gut will make T3. So if you've got a healthy gut, got a nice acidic environment in the gut, it's very important. Got good stomach acid levels, you got a good diversity of gut microbes, you're going to be making T3 in the gut and you're going to be feeling good. You will use a thyroid binding globulin again to move that thyroid over to the cell, and the same with this thyroid hormone T3 that's made in the liver from the abundance of T4 available. Okay, so we pretty much got through it. Now what I want to do is talk about, I'll briefly review, and then I want to talk about how things interfere here so you can get a practical idea of what's happening with the thyroid hormone. Okay, so starts in the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus makes a hormone TRH, sends a message to the pituitary gland to make TSH. TSH goes to the thyroid, where the thyroid can use iodine, sodium, tyrosine, and the TPO enzyme to make T4 and T3. It makes a little bit of T3 and a lot of T4. That gets circulated on our tractor trailer thyroid binding globulins to the cell. where it'll go into the nucleus. And if you've got vitamin A, you've got methyl groups, you got healthy blood sugar control, bam, your cells are going to be happy. They're going to do what they need to with that thyroid hormone. And then this extra T4 that you've got, you have the potential to move that into being even better form of T3 in your liver with this 5' deiodinase pathway that depends on adequate iron, adequate selenium. Zinc can be important too. I didn't mention that, but I'm mentioning it now. And serotonin and dopamine. You also need sunlight. Talk about that a little more in a minute. And vitamin D to help enable this whole process. Vitamin D is an enabler of a lot of different chemical reactions, helps keep the immune system in check. So it helps the thyroid to minimize the immune impact on the thyroid that way. And actually our brain and our thyroid gland respond to adequate light to make more thyroid hormones. So if you're not getting adequate natural light, you'll be more predisposed to make less. We got a couple other pathways here. The T4 to reverse T3 is a way to tie up extra hormone. And then the T4 to T3 acetate, T3 sulfate, it's going to go to the liver. If you've got a healthy gut, got the right acidity in your gut and the right microbes in your gut, you're going to make even more T3 there, and that's going to be a source. Okay, so you got that. So now let's talk about, well, if there was like a big stressor, how about the person has, I don't know, some kind of chronic stress, and the cortisol levels are dysregulated, we're going to start to see that interfering. It's going to interfere here, here. If they were injured or something, they're not moving, or they're have a poor pattern of breathing, you know, this is going to be affected. Cortisol levels are also going to impact the 5' deiodinase. Cortisol, the stress hormone, is also going to thin the gut lining and impair T3 production in the gut. So you begin to see how like chronic stress could affect things that way. Remember, I was also talking about cytokines, the pro-inflammatory chemicals that interfere with the thyroid. So we know when the body has something that's bothering it, maybe it's a microbe or an environmental allergen, or it's a food like gluten that they're eating, that is going to interfere with the hypothalamus and the pituitary. It's also going to interfere with the thyroid gland directly. Cytokines impair this 5' deiodinase pathway, and cytokines very much disrupt healthy gut function and will block the T3 conversion in the gut. So you get a sense of how widespread immune response, like really bad allergies, to begin to interfere with the thyroid functioning. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen again. Okay, so now you understand the 4 steps to thyroid physiology. We talked about the raw materials, right? I'll go over those again in a second, but they're things like tyrosine, iodine, iron, selenium, protein. Protein is one of those things that's so important for the thyroid. I've seen a number of people in my practice. I've been practicing as a naturopathic doctor for 15 years. And I've seen a number of people who come in and they just kind of have a borderline thyroid issue. Like maybe they have a really good doctor or an integrative doctor who actually identified it for them. And then I start working with them and realize that, you know, their protein levels subpar. All we do is increase the protein in the diet. And I've seen this in a number of cases where the thyroid health improves. And that's because that adequate amount of protein not only is going to provide tyrosine, but it's also going to control their blood sugar better, right? So they're not going to have the blood sugar problems with the receptor sites. Blood sugar will also interfere with the conversion pathway. So they're going to have fewer problems with T3 conversion there. And adequate protein in the diet also helps regulate cortisol. I have a whole nother webinar on protein that you can look if you want to watch it on my website. I would say for someone who's sedentary, who's not very active, you've got to start with like a minimum maybe of 65 grams of protein daily. Somebody who's more active, physically active, has a higher protein requirement, maybe they're older, they're elderly, you're going to have a minimum of 80 to 90 grams of protein every day. So just an example of those raw materials. Moving on, you know now that the HPA axis has got to be really healthy, right? Because the hypothalamus and the pituitary are sensing the level of thyroid hormone that's circulating, and they're adjusting. This sometimes is confusing to people when they're first learning to interpret the TSH, because TSH will actually be high when your thyroid hormone level is low. So your pituitary will sense when your thyroid hormone level is low, and TSH will go up. That's a little counterintuitive, and sometimes people are kind of confused when they first learn about this hormone. Conversely, if there's too much hormone, then the pituitary will let up a little bit and TSH will go down. There is a third case where if someone's under a lot of stress, their pituitary might not make enough TSH and the level will go down, but it won't be because the thyroid hormones are up. In fact, the thyroid hormones can also be low because they're not getting the message. So it's really important sometimes to look carefully at the T3 and the T4 as well as the TSH. Because sometimes if you just look at the TSH and it's low, for example, you have no idea why. Is it because the thyroid hormone levels are high, or is it because they're too low and the person's just exhausted from stress? The other step you now understand is that you need to have hormone conversion to T3 happening in the liver and the gut. And you need to have the healthy things in the receptor site so that the cell can actually receive and use the thyroid hormone.